Today we are going to be doing the brakes on a 2016 Lexus GS200t. It's the rear-wheel drive, 2-liter turbo 4-cylinder. I believe this is going to be the same process on GS350, so on and so forth. This is the non-F Sport, so the part numbers change a little bit for the F Sport models, but it should be the same for everything else. In this video, we'll be replacing the rotors, the brake pads, and the brake shims, the brake pad shims. First thing, you want to pop the wheel off, get yourself all jacked up, and then we're going to go after these two caliper bolts. There's one here and one here. And Lexus likes to torque these pretty tight, and it's kind of a restricted area, so make sure you get a good impact or breaker bar that can reach in there. Now when you pull this other bolt out, either have a hanger for the caliper, or I'm using a little brick so I can kind of work on putting the new pads in. It's easier than hanging it. And the rotor does come loose on this car when you pop that off. And I'll just take the rotor off now to get it out of the way, since I won't be needing this one anymore. You can see our pads were getting down there. But I just bought this car and the rotors were very, very, very warped, very bad. So I figured I'll just go do the whole thing and get it good as new. Next, what you do, we gotta compress the pistons so there's room for the new pads to fit around the new rotor. Keep in mind when you compress the pistons on both these calipers that you're pushing fluid back up into your brake fluid reservoir. So you want to keep an eye on that and make sure you don't overfill it. I did the other side of this already and it didn't have any issue with overfilling. But I'll have to keep an eye on it since we are doing a second one. So we'll be squeezing fluid into there. So just squeeze one, squeeze the other, get them all bottomed out, and then we can go ahead and take the pads off. I use the C-clamp method. Simple. Okay, now that got both sides of the caliper compressed, you can go ahead and take your C-clamps off. Get them out of the way. I'm gonna flip the caliper over. We're going to take this little pin out here, and then this pin will slide out here, which will release the spring tensioner, and then your pads and shims will come out. These are your shims right here, these one there and there. Now you're going to take your pads off. I do these one at a time. You got your outer shim and your inner shim there. And then the anti-seize in the middle of everything. So I'll just do this one at a time. I'll get the exact same stack up. I'll slide it right back in, and then I'll do the other one. One thing to note, these are different pads. One's got the screecher and one doesn't, so make sure you get them correct. You see that's the one with the screecher. Oh, excuse me, sorry, this one was the one with the screecher there. Now there's two different shims here, and you're gonna get both of these types on each one of your pads. If you look at the old one, you can see that has kind of like the checkered texture on the side that hits the pad, and then the side that hits the caliper is more smooth. And likewise here, you got that textured and then the smooth. So you got to make sure those are in the same orientation. And we're going to go ahead and anti-seize the back of these up. Anti-seize keeps it from rattling. We'll go ahead and go a little heavy on that. I fill these guys up, just these little wells. And we'll get a good smear. I'll usually put too much on it first and then wipe the excess off. Like that. Okay, and we'll drop our first one on, which is the textured one. Little flip fins go right in here. And then I'll put a little more anti-seize in between this guy, not nearly as much. Then we'll set our second one down. Like that. And then one more dab of anti-seize on this guy. And then you can go ahead and set this guy back in to the caliper. Make sure you get your orientation correct. And likewise, we'll take this guy out and do the same thing on this one. Okay, now we got all the pads assembled with the shims. I'll go ahead and get a retainer back in here. Give it a little bit of pressure. You want it nice and centered. A little bit of pressure to keep the pads from collapsing. And then slide your pin back in. You gotta push down on the spring. Like that. And then you want to orientate your little pinhole here so that your little clip goes in correctly. You might need to adjust the pads a little bit, like that. Slip your pin in. And then you're ready to put the rotor back on. So from here on out, you want to be as clean as you can with the rotor and the brake pads. I take this shot to go, I'm just going to spray down the pads with cleaner. Same thing with the rotor. ahead and set your rotor on. I like to take a lug nut or two just to locate this so it's easier to get your caliper around it. Obviously you would remove these before you put the wheel on. Like so. Caliper bolts, and I'll put some blue Loctite on these. Got the caliper bolts Loctited. Go ahead and slip the caliper over the rotor. Get one bolt in. Okay, and these caliper bolts will be torqued to 100 foot-pounds. It's a little hard to find online what they get torqued to, but the general consensus was about 100, which makes sense because my impact gun was having an issue getting them off. After those are torqued down, go ahead and give your wheel a spin, make sure they're nice and true, and you go ahead and put your wheel back on and go for a test drive.